Okay, so I know this is not a typical video for me. If you've seen my channel before, I actually do DIYs, I do like home decor, that kind of stuff. But I have been taken in by the mania around Heated Rivalry. I decided to look at the different characters and figure out what their Myers-Briggs type are. So I tend to do this all the time. If you're around me, I am passively typing you. So I'm just gonna do a deep dive into Shane's Myers-Briggs type and kind of bring up some examples and analysis about that. But if this is of interest to you, I can do videos on Ilya. I could do one on their different types and how they interact together and what kind of problems that might bring up for the future. Just let me know. Let's get started with just sort of like overall why we're so taken in by Shane. I think it's because he's a lot like us. The type that I've arrived at is the most common Myers-Briggs type among men, and it's the third most common across all genders. So we see ourselves in him perhaps. You know, he's awkward, he's anxiety-ridden, he's very earnest and humble, and he's boring, according to Ilya. And that's a really great character to have, where you can see yourself in them. And then the fantasy element of this, which you can see in all sorts of shows and fanfic, is they're boring, I'm boring, maybe some hot, hockey dude will rescue me, and I don't have to be a personable or charming person at all. I could just be this boring ass person, and it all works out. So it's a good character, but he's got hidden depths, which we'll get into a little bit further. Some of the other things that we like about a character, specifically Shane, is that he's like struggling. He's got these high expectations from the hockey world, from his family, for himself, and he's struggling with all of that. He's a great character because there's that yearning, which is something that has made everybody else yearn as well. It's very easy to want stuff. It's not easy to get it, but again, this is a fantasy. So, if you're a boring, awkward person and you yearn enough, maybe you get Ilya. So just a quick overview of how I'm going to attack this. I'm going to look at the Myers-Briggs type, which is those 4 letters. And they, look at things like extroversion, introversion, sensor versus intuitive, feeler versus thinker, and judger versus perceiver. Those are just like a quick sort of classification of a type. Then I'm going to dig a little bit deeper and talk about the cognitive functions, which were developed by Jung. He's like a really dead psychologist from the early 1900s, late 1800s, and he developed an idea of these mental processes or cognitive functions that help you make decisions and process information. And those are the underlying things that I'm going to draw a lot of examples from. We each use all of these functions, all 8 of them, but the top 4 are the most important for us. Those are the ones that we identify as the most. Okay, so we'll just start off with my hypothesis of what Shane is, which is an ISTJ. Overall, if you read kind of the stereotypical descriptions of an ISTJ, you're going to hear that they're very conservative, they're organized, detail-oriented, kind of like a monotone, flat voice. They're change avoidant, they're loyal, competent, very past-oriented, kind of reflecting on the past. Scared of being vulnerable, but they have a vulnerability to them as well. Okay, so let's talk about the first letter, which is I for introvert. For an introvert, it's really about where the real world is for you, whether it's internally in your head or if it's externally. It's not really like, ooh, you're a social being or not. For Shane, one of the ways that you can see an introversion is that he holds back before he speaks. And you can even see it in his text. He texts something, he stops, he deletes it, he goes back and he kind of refines it before, he speaks. So it's kind of like a thinking before he speaks. So the idea of an introvert, very obvious. I think that was like some low-hanging fruit there. The next letter is S for sensor. And sensors tend to like concrete, reliable, verifiable information. There's less comfort with the abstract. So he's not like talking in metaphors and he's not like extrapolating things. They prefer like an infrastructure and explicit instructions. We'll get into this in the other episode that talks about the relationship between Ilya and Shane, but there might be something into the fact that he's kind of like a sub. So like preferable for him to have instructions that he can just follow. He wants to know where he's at. So the next letter is T for thinker, and the opposite would be F for feeler. Now, we all think, we all feel. The difference is how we make our big decisions. Do we make them based on our feelings or about other people's feelings? Or do we make them based on logic, metrics, cost, energy, things like that, resources? So for Shane, It's pretty obvious to me that he's a thinker because thinkers tend to have issues with feeling. His particular type of thinking is always about a return on investment, or ROI. Is this worth my time, energy, etc.? And then the last letter is J for judger. The alternative would be P for perceiver. And that one's a little bit more about like where you like organization. Do you like improvisation, or do you like things to be organized? And it's pretty clear that Shane likes things to be organized, right? So he prefers like some order in the outer world. Example, he's always like folding his clothes. He hates messes, things like that. And he does things, he plans to avoid surprises. Whereas I think you can probably guess that Ilya is kind of the opposite. He's very much like in the moment. He can improvise in the moment. He's not planning years ahead. Those were just the overview of what an ISTJ looks like, but now I'm going to do the deeper dive into the cognitive functions, like literally what mental processes is he using to make his decisions and process information. His dominant function, which is the tool that he uses for everything, is called introverted sensing. So it's an introverted function. We'll call it SI for short. So SI is a way to process information, like take in information and process it. So for an SI Dom, their understanding of the world and even their identity is like an aggregate of all of their past experiences, and more specifically, their impressions of their past experiences. This is how they form their worldview. It's very contextual of their impressions of their past experiences. So for example, if you got bit by a dog when you're a kid or something like that, you're like, ooh, dogs, not safe. And every future time you're around a dog, you might be like, unsafe, not going there. And the same would work for a positive experience. The past really informs the future for them. SI asks the question, where have I seen this before? SI DOMs post-process all of their interactions and they assign meaning to those interactions. What they're doing is really tracking minute changes over time. So they're very detail-oriented in that way. They notice things. And they're looking for a proven track record. They like expertise, they like relying on experts. In general, I'd say SI DOMs, they like to know what to expect. They don't like surprises. They like to plan to avoid chaos. They honor tradition and legacy. So now let's talk about Shane and his examples of introverted sensing. He's a pretty predictable guy and he likes to plan, right? He plans in great detail. He's always like, where are we meeting? Okay, well, what's the location? What's the time? What's the security code? How much time do we have? It's like very logistically based, in my apartment. No, like he has to figure these things out. And when he does do things like when they're going to the cottage, he's got food set out. He's got, all the rooms are ready. So planning, predictability, that's how he kind of manages the chaos of the unknown, is by planning stuff. Organizes his life around routines. I mean, you might say that a lot of athletes have routines, and I'm sure they do, but some of them are more like flexible. And it seems like he, hits the same machines the same times. He just has a very specific routine. Actually, in the book, you can read this. He does talk about what time he wakes up, when he does all these different things. So routine's very important. So another theme of SI is kind of safety or security oriented, which we see Shane being a lot, right? Like, Scott Hunter's in the next room, oh my God, no. And so he tries to control the experience to make it, one that he can relax in. That's the whole point of the cottage. It's like, I want to relax with you in the cottage for once. And the only way I can do that is if I control the environment a lot. In fact, he actually just buys an entire building just so that they can, hook up, which I think is funny. Okay, so then we'll talk about familiarity, how important that is to him. He follows his family into hockey. His dad played for McGill. His mom is a hockey obsessive person or whatever. And even though hockey is probably not the best career for somebody who gets overstimulated, requires a lot of change, it's a lot of presenting, being in front of people. These are things that he's uncomfortable with. He went into hockey. I'm sure there's love for it and whatever, which we'll get into later. But also because it is a familiar thing. His family does it, so that was a path that was laid out for him, and he feels comfortable doing that. He finds comfort with his family. He always goes to their cottage every year. It's a comfortable place for him. And so I guess he just sort of assumes that everybody has a comfortable family situation. We tend to do that. We tend to overvalue our own experience and think that other people have the same experience. So he even uses this as an opener to Ilya to kind of open up. Hey, aren't you excited to see your family? Those kinds of things, and doesn't really read the signals. Okay, another source of kind of comfort for him or familiarity is the ginger ale. So even when he's out and about, he's going to bars, things that he feels uncomfortable with, he's seeking out the ginger ale because this is a source of comfort. And I think later on, Ilya taps into that and makes sure he has it. Even his friend Hayden's like, okay, makes you feel like a normal person. We will have this for you. Okay, and then the fourth thing that is SI related is that he's detail oriented. In the first episode, the media says that Shane is this amazing, hockey player, and he has a high hockey IQ, which I had to look up because I was like, what the fuck is that? I think it has something to do with just like understanding what moves to make when, understanding the players. So he watches a lot of tape. Again, he has that attention to detail. He reflects back probably on previous mistakes and tries to adjust. He's planning things so that in the moment he can take advantage of certain opportunities. So it's that attention to detail that he has that allows him to be a very effective player. Other examples of him being detail oriented, he's like following this recipe, to the T, irrespective of the fact that, they don't need 8 burgers. He is instituting a microbiotic diet, for which I don't know what is going on with that, but that's very specific, right? He's probably trying to get a certain aim. He's got very specific metrics he wants to hit. So that's a very detail-oriented kind of diet. It's not just like calories in, calories out. It's like this type of calorie or something. The other thing that he is, he's watching tape for all of the hockey games, and he's also watching Ilya kind of obsessively. He's watching all of his social media, the things that he says. So he's learning about Ilya by watching his social media. So that's another way that he is very detail oriented. So we're going to talk about his second function. It's also called the auxiliary function.
This is called extrovert thinking. So before when we were talking about SI, his dominant function, which is all about processing information, extroverted thinking, or TE, takes that information and makes decisions with it. Extroverted thinking is a problem-solving mental process that is very goal-oriented or outcome-oriented. And TE makes decisions by asking what works in this context. It uses criteria like logic, metrics, resources, like how much time do I have, how much energy, how much money do I have. And T is primarily concerned with the return on my investment. So what is the ROI of doing this versus doing something else? And because it's so oriented on resource management, it becomes very efficient and very competent. In order for it to work, to consider things like metrics or logic, it needs to be divorced from feeling or emotions, because those are the things that get in the way of efficiency.
So where do we see this with Shane? We'll talk about how he is the Mr. Businessman, right? As Ilya keeps on talking about, he is a Mr. Landlord, Mr. Businessman. He has this real estate fetish, and it's paying off. So even when he makes decisions based on, this need for security, like buying a building so that they can hook up, he knows he's going to get a return on that investment anyways. So these are always calculated decisions. When he is designing even like a charity, right? He's leveraging stuff that he already knows he's good at. We're going to do a school, and then we're going to take the proceeds of that like hockey camp, and we're going to give it to raise funds for mental health and other charities. You will also notice that Shane uses resource management to delegate things he doesn't feel like he's good at. He gets a stylist. He has an interior decorator for all the pillows. He's like, I'm not good at this, delegate. And that's not even talking about all of his brand deals. I mean, he's taking advantage of any opportunity that comes his way. He's not even into drinking, but he's doing a drinking campaign. It is divorced from his maybe true feelings about drinking, but he's doing some sort of drink campaign, even though we know he just drinks ginger ale for right now. He's all about leveraging his current standing to, make that bank or whatever. So another part of extrovert thinking is competitiveness or competence. We know he's competitive. He's competitive with Ilya. I think what's important here to look at the competitiveness, and obviously hockey's a very competitive game, is to understand the why he's competitive, because it's a different reason why Ilya is competitive. So for him, it's important to kind of keep up a legacy with his family, with the team that he is in Montreal. So it's really linked to his introverted sensing, which is all about legacy, loyalty to a particular, organization. There's a little bit about mastery within himself, wanting to prove that he can do these things. And again, it comes to being goal-oriented. So I don't think it's mentioned in the book, or I don't think it's mentioned in the show, but in the book, he also has a goal of like getting 50 goals in his rookie year or something like that, but he's not like saying it out loud to the media like Ilya is, and that's because he wants to leverage that information, right? He wants to appear humble because that works better for his image, and it works better for his brand deals. He is also the captain of his team, the captain of the All-Stars team, even though being a leader pushes him into a place that's probably more uncomfortable. Like he's in front of the media some more, they're asking more questions. So that would be an uncomfortable thing. But again, there's a level of like competence and competitiveness, and even just this needs to be done so that I can get this outcome. So he knows maybe the best way for them to win a cup is for him to be the captain. So he takes that on, even if it's maybe not always the most comfortable place. So that's how he pushes himself. Other examples of competence, he's proficient, we'll call it proficient in French, and fluent in birds. I think even Ilya comments on how perfect he is. So again, he shows a lot of confidence. And that's another thing. When you see his interactions with Ilya, Ilya always has a quip about something. He's always needling him. He likes to sort of push the envelope with him and get him to loosen up. And Shane has a lot of insecurities about identity, sexuality, things like that. But Ilya can't really hurt him when it's a quip about his competence. Like he can shrug that off. He can smile that off because he is supremely confident in being a really good hockey player. So even when like Ilya says he has a weak backhand, it's just that's something he can brush off. Now, if he says something kind of derisive about his sexuality or something like that, it's a little bit harder for him because that's a deep insecurity. When I talk about output-oriented or goal-oriented, I kind of want to talk a little bit about how this function views information. Extroverted thinking understands that information can be weaponized. So you might be a lot more careful about what you say, what you withhold, because you know that it can be used against you later. You'll see the contrast when we talk about Ilya's type, but in general, extroverted thinking is very aware of the weaponization of information. And you'll see that with Shane. Like there's a lot of stuff he holds back, and it's a protective measure. But he also withholds or always says very specific information to achieve his goal. So he's kind of trying to go towards a specific goal. And one of the ways that he weighs what he says to get a desired outcome, like when he's trying to decide if he should come out to his parents, he's like, I don't know if it's worth the energy to say this. I'm in a relationship that I can't be in, so we can put that off for later. It's not worth the effort or the heartbreak that comes from saying this. And so he's not pushed to really come out. And then the last sort of point I want to make about extroverted thinking is how it's divorced from feeling. And we see that with Shane in general. Like he kind of has a very unexpressive voice. It's a little monotone. He's not like performative, even when he's doing interviews. He kind of doesn't rise to any bait. Again, he's weighing what to say to them for desired outcomes. Okay, this is getting quite long. We're just at the third function. There's 4 total, so I'm just going to try to go a little bit faster. So we're going to talk about his next function, which is his feeling function, right? Because we all think, we all feel. So his tertiary function is introverted feeling. Now, introverted feeling is also a decision-making function, and sometimes as an introvert, you might jump into this one instead of your extroverted decision-making function just because it's a little bit more comfortable. But that brings problems, right? So let's talk about introverted feeling, or FI. So FI is the polar opposite of the ISTJ's extroverted thinking. So where extroverted thinking is asking what works and it's divorced from feeling, introverted feeling is all feeling. It's all the feelings. And you're asking yourself, what aligns with me and my personal values? FI is connecting with the most authentic version of you, and it's kind of examining your values and how they change in different contexts. So it can be quite nuanced, right? So FI also helps us define ourselves as characters within our own life. So the tertiary function will come out negatively when we're stressed, but it can also be used in times of intimacy or play. So as this is a tertiary function, ISTJs will always feel a little bit uncertain around this. They'll need validation from other people about what they're feeling. So that you might not see as much nuance as a tertiary function as you would as a dominant function. Examples of FI and Shane. So one of the overarching categories is representation, right? You're a character in your own life. He doesn't really want to represent anything besides him being good at hockey. He's really uncomfortable with, being compared to Serena Williams or Tiger Woods. He does not want to be like a figurehead for, the Asian Canadian world. And while he respects, the bravery of Scott Hunter coming out, it doesn't make him want to come out. He doesn't want to, again, be a figurehead for gay athletes. He just wants to be known as himself or just be evaluated based on his skill. So he struggles to understand his sexuality in the context of like this hyper masculine, sport that's pretty misogynistic, homophobic. And he needs other people like Ilya and Rose to sort of prod him or guide him or validate who he is, because it's not something that he feels very aware of or even comfortable with. Again, like he uses past examples to extrapolate the meaning for him. So he looks at the past and understands what a path forward is. But currently, there is no path forward for a gay hockey player. So it isn't until Scott comes out that he can start laying down a path for how this could work for him. And it's still, again, it's not a big like showy how this would work for him. It would be like we retire and quietly come out and live our lives. But at least that's a path, and that's the point at which it makes sense for him to even think about how this could work. Okay, so then we're going to talk about narrative, which is a big part of introverted feeling. Shane uses these very specifically. He constructs narratives to protect himself and accomplish goals. So he'll feed into the rivalry narrative if that helps, protect his relationship with Ilya, and it also helps him, look as like a great commodity for the hockey world. He dates a high-profile actress to create a narrative about him being straight. And then he even generates the narrative that's all around the charity. This is a reason why when we go outside, and see each other in the public, no one's going to bat an eyelash because he's thought about the narrative. Then he also has the fun bellboy narrative. So this is a place of play for him. He can, do a bunch of role play here as well. The last topic for introverted feeling is about asking for what you want, because it's really understanding your values and asking for what you want. The ginger ale comes up a lot. That's something that he wants, and he'll ask for it, and then some like annoying bartender will make him feel bad about that choice, and then he'll change his mind. So again, it's kind of another one of these symbols about asking for what you want, even if it's kind of like a lame choice or perceived by other people to be boring. So he wants to be around other people who pretty much acknowledge that he's himself, he's boring, and that's why the ginger ale is acceptable. So Ilya, Hayden make him feel okay about that. Since this is his third function, it'll come out in times of intimacy as well. And maybe some of that kind of submissive feeling he has in the bedroom is a little bit about this, right? He just has to wait for Ilya to tell him what to do. He doesn't have to always ask for it. And I think Ilya gloms onto this and tells him what to do so that he doesn't have to make the decision. And eventually he starts feeling more confident asking for what he wants, and even Ilya makes it worthwhile to ask for what he wants. So that's like a little bit of an aside, although I'll talk in more detail about that if anybody wants to see another video on this. I guess furthermore, when he gets more confident at the cottage, she says, like, let's just be honest with each other, and see what we really feel and what we really want. So this is showing his growth. He's starting to actually ask for what he wants. This last function is his blind spot. It's a place of deep uncertainty. All of us have a place of deep uncertainty. This is one of them. So it's the polar opposite function to his dominant function. So whereas his dominant function, SI, asks things like, where have I seen this before? Extroverted intuition asks, looks at all other possibilities. It's like, ooh, what if this, and what's next? It's like throwing things at the wall and just sort of seeing what happens, just seeing what unfolds. So it's about change and novelty, which is something as a blind spot for Shane is really uncomfortable. It can, instead of manifesting of like, ooh, fun possibilities, it'll be like, what are all the negative possibilities? What are all the worst case scenarios? And it's like a catastrophizing. Now, the other thing that's great about your fourth function is that it can be a place of like aspiration. So it can be a place of great growth if you start to really work towards it. It will kind of push you to take a leap of faith. Just try something, see what happens, and kind of trust that you can figure it out in the moment instead of preparing endlessly. Okay, where do we see this with Shane? So one of the main themes of extroverted intuition is curiosity and growth. He's taking these little leaps, change, something unfamiliar outside your comfort zone. Shane leads a life that has a very clear roadmap. We have kind of like some other characters that act as foils, right? To show you what the clear roadmap is. Maybe Hayden, where here's what it is you work really hard at hockey, and you get your trad wife, and then you get like your 4 kids under 4. You know, that's one route. It's very clear, this is what you do. Or you could be like Ilya, where you're just like a ladies' man, you're going out every night, that kind of thing. That's another route. And yet he does something, he pushes himself to listen to what he wants, and he does something that is uncomfortable. When Shane becomes attracted to Ilya, he takes this impulsive leap of faith and just meets with him and says, let's see what happens. You know, like, what if? What would this look like? There is not a path that is laid before him. He is taking initiative and is curious. I guess another place where we see growth and curiosity in the form of extroverted intuition is that Shane has always felt this sort of insecurity around his identity, especially in the face of Ilya's assholery, if you will. So once he gets kind of some validation from Rose that it's okay to be who he wants, then he starts getting curious and starts taking little leaps of faith. He's the one who really pushes the relationship with Ilya forward. He starts expressing how he feels and says, what if, you know, like I think when they're in the hotel room during the All-Stars, he says, but would you like to be if we could, you know, if. These are exploratory questions of extroverted intuition. I think also another time too, we see his inhibitions down was when he's in the hospital and he's like drugged up or whatever. And then he's saying, what if we met at the cottage? What would happen there? He's not even like going super far into the future, like how this would do this. It's just like, what if we went to the cottage? How great was that? Again, he's just taking these little leaps of faith. He has this aspiration to be better with change, essentially, and it's working for him. Now, there are times where this is a real blind spot for him and it kind of comes out in a negative way. I think you'll see that in his impulsivity, right? In episode 4, Shane has an experience with Ilya where there's a new level of intimacy. They say each other's first names, and it's like he can't process what this means, right? This just happened. I don't have time to process this. And he was influenced a lot by poorly executed conversation that he had with Ilya beforehand, where Ilya was trying to suss out whether or not Shane knew if he was bisexual or fully gay. And instead what Shane took away from that is like, I should try being with a woman. Now, never in the rest of the show have we seen him have any interest in women. So it's a real impulsive thing to be like, and I'm gonna find a woman now. So I think that's an example of him using this in a very negative way, in this kind of impulsive way. So if you made it to the end of this, I am impressed. Let me know if you want another one of these on Ilya or on Ilya and Shane and how they work together, complement each other, work against each other, that kind of stuff. I could do that. Or if you'd prefer me to get back to working on my house, I could do that too. I have a lot of projects. This was fun. Hope you enjoyed it. Bye-bye.